You have been taught a lie. The most beloved person in the room, the one everyone gravitates toward, the one with the warmest smile and the most friends, is rarely the one in control. In fact, their likability is often the very thing that strips them of power. This is not a comforting truth. This is the architecture of human hierarchies, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Think about the last workplace you observed, the last group of friends, the last family gathering. There was someone everyone loved, the peacemaker, the one who made others feel comfortable, the one who remembered birthdays and asked how you were doing. And then there was someone else, someone fewer people openly adored, someone who made decisions, someone whose approval actually mattered. These are rarely the same person, and there is a reason for that, buried deep in evolutionary psychology and social dynamics. Likability is a currency, but it is not the currency of power. It is the currency of acceptance. And acceptance, by definition, requires you to mold yourself to the expectations of others. You laugh at their jokes. You soften your opinions. You avoid confrontation. You make yourself easy to digest. This is the trade. You gain affection by becoming less threatening, less sharp, less absolute. But power does not bend. Power does not apologize for taking up space. Consider the concept of sociometric status versus socioeconomic status. I studied extensively by researchers like Mitch Prinstein. Sociometric status is how much people like you. Socioeconomic status, in a social sense, is how much people respect your position and influence. These can overlap, but more often than not, they diverge. The prom king is loved. The student council president who actually changes school policy is respected. One is popular, the other has power. History has shown us this pattern again and again. Look at Franklin D. Roosevelt and Eleanor Roosevelt. Eleanor was deeply beloved by the public, seen as compassionate, empathetic, a voice for the marginalized. Franklin was respected, sometimes feared, often criticized. But Franklin held the executive power. Eleanor influenced through affection and moral authority. But when policy was signed, when war decisions were made, when the structure of the nation shifted, it was Franklin's hand on the lever. Her likability gave her a platform. His willingness to be disliked gave him control. You see this in corporate environments with stunning clarity. The manager everyone loves is often not the one who gets promoted to executive leadership. Why? Because they have spent years optimizing for harmony. They avoid difficult conversations. They struggle to fire underperformers. They want to be seen as fair, as kind, as understanding. And all of those qualities make them excellent at maintaining morale, but terrible at making the cold. Strategic decisions that power requires. The person who gets promoted is often the one willing to be resented, the one who cuts budgets, restructures teams, says no without guilt. There is a psychological mechanism at play here called the approval addiction. When your self-worth is tied to being liked, every decision you make is filtered through a single question. Will this make people like me less? That question is a cage. It means you cannot set boundaries without anxiety. You cannot prioritize your own goals without guilt. You cannot leverage your position without fear of social rejection. And those in power know this. They can predict your behavior because your need for approval makes you controllable. Now consider the opposite. Think of someone who does not seem to care whether you like them, not in an aggressive way, not in a performative way, but in a fundamentally unbothered way. They state their perspective clearly. They make decisions that benefit their goals, even when those decisions are unpopular. They do not rush to smooth over tension. This person makes you slightly uncomfortable, and that discomfort is not a flaw in their strategy. It is the strategy. Discomfort creates a gap, and in that gap, a hierarchy forms. When someone does not need your approval, They are elevated above you in the social structure, whether you realize it or not. You begin to seek their validation instead. You adjust your behavior around them. You wonder what they think of you. This is the inversion. The person who needs to be liked is always looking up. The person who does not need it is already above. This is why narcissists and highly disagreeable people often end up in leadership positions, even when they are not well liked. Studies on the dark triad traits, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy show that individuals high in these traits are overrepresented in executive roles, not because they are better leaders in terms of ethics or long-term organizational health, but because they are willing to prioritize power over popularity. They do not lose sleep over being the villain in someone else's story. Let's talk about a historical example that makes this undeniable. In ancient Rome, the position of consul was the highest elected office, but the people who held real, sustained power were often not the consuls. They were figures like Crassus, who controlled wealth and resources, or Augustus, who carefully managed his public image but did not obsess over being loved by the Senate. Augustus was strategic. He allowed the Senate to hate him privately as long as they obeyed him publicly. He understood that admiration is optional, compliance is not. You might be thinking of exceptions. What about leaders who were both loved and powerful? What about figures like Nelson Mandela or Martin Luther King Jr.? Here is the nuance. And they were loved after they had already claimed their power, often through suffering, sacrifice, and an unwillingness to be hated by the opposition. Mandela spent 27 years in prison, vilified by the apartheid government and many in the international community. King was surveilled, slandered, and ultimately assassinated. Their likability among their supporters came because they stood firm in their mission, not because they softened themselves to be palatable. And they were loved for their strength, not their agreeability. And even then, they were hated by many. True power accepts that division. Now let's go deeper. There is a social script you have been taught since childhood. Be kind, be nice, don't make waves, share, compromise. Think of others. These are not bad principles for a functioning society, but they are not the principles that build individual power. They are the principles that build compliance. And society needs compliance to function smoothly, so it rewards you emotionally for being agreeable. A smile, a compliment, a sense of belonging. These feel good, but they do not move you up the ladder. The most liked person is often the most useful person, useful to others. They are the emotional laborer, the one who listens to everyone's problems, the one who organizes the group chat and makes sure everyone feels included. This is valuable work, but it is service work. And those who serve are rarely those who rule. Power is not given to those who make others comfortable. It is taken by those who make others uncertain. Uncertainty is a key ingredient in dominance. When people cannot fully predict you, when you hold something back, when your approval is not guaranteed, you become more valuable. Scarcity principle applies to attention and validation, just as it does to resources. If you give everyone your warmth and affirmation freely, it loses value. But if your approval is rare, selective, hard-earned, it becomes a prize. People begin to compete for it, and competition is the soil in which hierarchies grow. There is a term in social psychology called status leakage. It refers to the idea that trying too hard to be liked actually signals lower status. When you over-explain yourself, when you apologize excessively, when you laugh too eagerly at jokes that are not funny, you are leaking status. You are communicating without words that you are beneath the person you are trying to please. High-status individuals do not leak. They contain. They are measured. They do not rush to fill silence. Silence, in fact, is one of the most underestimated tools of power. The most liked person talks a lot. They facilitate. They ease awkwardness. They keep conversation flowing, but the most powerful person often says less. They let others fill the void. They listen, but not in a validating way. They listen strategically, gathering information, assessing, waiting for the moment their words will have maximum impact. When they finally speak, people listen, not because they are loved, but because they are respected, or feared, or needed. Let's examine a modern example. In tech companies, especially startups, there is often a beloved co-founder and a feared co-founder. The beloved one is the visionary, the one who gives TED Talks, the one employees want to have lunch with. The feared one is the operator, the one who enforces deadlines, the one who fires people who do not perform. Guess which one typically has more operational control? The feared one, because power is not about inspiration, it is about enforcement. This does not mean cruelty is necessary for power. It means that the willingness to disappoint people is necessary. The willingness to make decisions that serve the goal, not the ego or the social comfort of the group. And the most liked person struggles with this because disappointing people feels like failure to them. But to the powerful, disappointing some people is simply the cost of leading. Here is where it gets darker. The most liked person is also the easiest to manipulate. Because their need for approval is visible, others can exploit it. If you know someone will do almost anything to avoid conflict or rejection, you can push boundaries with them. You can take more than you give. You can make demands and watch them struggle to say no. Their likability becomes a leash that others hold. Think about the friend everyone loves who always gets taken advantage of. The one who loans money they never get back. The one who always volunteers for the inconvenient task. The one who forgives betrayals too quickly. They are loved, yes, but they are not respected. And without respect, there is no power. People do not fear disappointing them because they know they will be forgiven. One, there is no consequence, no boundary, no cost. Power requires consequence. It requires the ability to withdraw your presence, your resources, your favor. And the most liked person has often trained others to expect unconditional availability. They have taught the group that their affection is guaranteed. So when they finally try to set a boundary, it is met with shock, resistance, even anger. How dare you change the terms? But the powerful person sets terms from the beginning, and they train others to respect limits, to earn access, to understand that approval is conditional. Now let's address the paradox. If being liked does not equal power, why do so many people in power still seek to be liked? Because even the powerful are human, even they crave validation. But here is the difference. They seek it after securing power, not as a strategy to obtain it. A CEO might do a charm offensive after making a brutal round of layoffs. A politician might smile for cameras after passing an unpopular law. The sequence matters. Power first, likability as a bonus, if convenient. There is also the illusion of the benevolent leader. Some powerful people are skilled at appearing warm and likable while still maintaining control. But look closer. Their warmth is strategic. It is deployed selectively. It is a tool, not a need. They can turn it off without internal crisis. The truly likable person cannot. Their warmth is their identity. Remove it, and they feel they have lost themselves. Let's bring in another layer. Evolutionary psychology suggests that in small tribes, being liked was essential for survival. Ostracism meant death, so humans evolved a deep neurological need for social acceptance. But modern hierarchies are not small tribes. They are complex, stratified systems where being liked by everyone is not only unnecessary, it is often a liability. The traits that helped our ancestors survive in groups of 50 do not necessarily translate to power in organizations of 5,000. The people who rise in modern hierarchies are often those who have either naturally low need for approval or who have trained themselves to suppress it. They have decoupled their self-worth from social feedback. This is not easy. It goes against deep wiring, but it is possible. And it is one of the most significant psychological shifts separating those who lead from those who follow. Consider the concept of frame control. In any interaction, someone's frame, their interpretation of reality, dominates. The person with the strongest frame is usually the one less affected by social pressure. If you need the other person to like you, you will adopt their frame to avoid conflict. If you do not need their approval, you hold your frame. Are socially flexible, empathetic, attuned to the needs of others, and able to adapt their behavior to fit the situation. They are not rigid or inflexible, but rather fluid and adaptable. They are able to navigate social interactions with ease and grace and to build strong and meaningful relationships with others. They are not afraid to take risks or to try new things, and they are not afraid to fail. They are not afraid to be themselves, and they are not afraid to be vulnerable. They are not afraid to be honest, and they are not afraid to be open. They are not afraid to be themselves, and they are not afraid to be themselves. They are not afraid to be themselves, and they are not afraid to be themselves. They are not afraid to be themselves, and they are not afraid to be themselves. They are not afraid to be themselves, and they are not afraid to be themselves. They are not afraid to be themselves, and they are not afraid to be themselves. They are not afraid to be themselves, and they are not afraid to be themselves. They are not afraid to be themselves, and they are not afraid to be themselves. They are not afraid to be themselves, and they are not afraid to be themselves. They are not afraid to be themselves, and they are not afraid to be themselves. They are not afraid to be themselves, and they are not afraid to be themselves. They are not afraid to be themselves, and they are not afraid to be themselves. They are not afraid to be themselves, and they are not afraid to be themselves. They are not afraid to be themselves, and they are not afraid to be themselves. They are not afraid to be themselves, and they are not afraid to be themselves. They are not afraid to be themselves, and they are not afraid to be themselves. They are not afraid to be themselves, and they are not afraid to be themselves. They are not afraid to be themselves, and they are not afraid to be themselves. They are not afraid to be themselves, and they are not afraid to be themselves. They are not afraid to be themselves, and they are not afraid to be themselves. They are not afraid to be themselves, and they are not afraid to be themselves. They are not afraid to be themselves, and they are not afraid to be themselves. They are not afraid to be themselves, and they are not afraid to be themselves. They are not afraid to be themselves, and they are not afraid to be themselves. They are not afraid to be themselves, and they are not afraid to be themselves. They are not afraid to be themselves, and they are not afraid to be themselves. They are not afraid to be themselves, and they are not afraid to be themselves. They are not afraid to be themselves, and they are not afraid to be themselves. They are not afraid to be themselves, and they are socially flexible, empathetic, attuned to the emotions in the room. These are beautiful qualities, but they are not power qualities. The powerful person has a fixed frame. Others must adapt to them. This is why powerful people often seem stubborn or uncompromising. They are not confused about their reality, and they do not need consensus to proceed. Here is a test. Think about someone you consider powerful in your life. Now think about whether you have ever changed your behavior to gain their approval. If the answer is yes, you have just identified the dynamic. You have adjusted to their frame. Now think about someone who is very well liked. Have they ever adjusted their behavior to gain your approval? Probably yes. That is the difference. There is also the trap of being the glue of a social group. I'm the person who connects everyone, who maintains relationships, who makes sure no one is left out. This person is essential to group cohesion. They are loved for it, but they are also taken for granted. Because their role is to serve the group's emotional needs, they become invisible as individuals with their own needs. The group assumes they will always be there, always accommodating, and the moment they stop, the group does not rally around them. It finds a new glue. Power, by contrast, is about being irreplaceable in function, not in affection. The person who controls resources, information, or decision-making authority cannot be easily replaced. Their absence creates a vacuum. The absence of the most liked person creates sadness, maybe, but the system continues. The absence of the powerful person creates crisis. Let's talk about validation economy. In any social structure, there is a flow of validation. Who seeks whose approval? Who defers to whom? And the most liked person is usually at the receiving end of affection, but the giving end of validation. They validate others to maintain harmony. The powerful person is at the receiving end of validation. Others seek their opinion, their approval, their acknowledgement. This asymmetry defines hierarchy. You can map any organization this way. Who is trying to impress whom? Who adjusts their schedule for whom? Who gets interrupted and who does not? The answers reveal the real power structure, which often differs from the official chart. And in that real structure, the most socially adored are rarely at the top. Now, the uncomfortable question. If you recognize yourself as the most liked person in your circles, what do you do with this information? First, understand that this is not about becoming cold or cruel. It is about recognizing the trade you have made. You have traded power for comfort. You have optimized for being included rather than being influential. That is a valid choice, but it should be a conscious one. If you want to shift, you must practice tolerating disapproval. Start small. Say no without over-explaining. State a preference without softening it. Hold a boundary when someone pushes. Notice the discomfort that arises in you. That discomfort is your nervous system warning you of social risk. But in the modern world, that risk is often exaggerated. Most people will not abandon you for a single boundary, and those who do were likely taking advantage of your lack of them. Second, become more selective with your warmth. This does not mean withholding it entirely. It means making it count. When your affirmation is rare, it becomes meaningful. When you are always available, your presence loses weight. Scarcity increases value. This is true for resources, and it is true for attention. Third, observe the powerful people around you, not to mimic them superficially, but to notice patterns. How do they handle disagreement? How do they respond to requests? How much do they explain their decisions? You will notice they often do less emotional labor than you expect. They do not manage everyone's feelings. They let people sit with discomfort, and the group adapts. There is a final, deeper truth here. The most liked person often sacrifices their own goals for group harmony. They delay their ambitions to help others. They minimize their own needs to avoid seeming selfish. Over years, this creates a life shaped by others' priorities. They wake up one day well-loved but unfulfilled, because likability gave them a place in the group, but not a path of their own. Power, uncomfortable as it sounds, is often about selfishness in the most neutral sense of that word. It is about prioritizing your vision, your goals, your boundaries. It is about understanding that you cannot please everyone and choosing not to try. This does not make you a bad person. It makes you a person with agency. The most liked person gives agency away in small, constant doses. A favor here, a compromise there, a suppressed opinion to keep peace. Each instance feels minor, but cumulatively they add up to a life lived in reaction to others. The powerful person hoards agency. They protect their time, their decisions, their energy. They seem less generous on the surface, but they are more sovereign. Think about historical revolutions, and the beloved figures were often not the ones who held power afterward. Robespierre was not universally loved. Stalin was feared. Mao was worshipped through fear and propaganda, not genuine affection. Even in democracies, the most effective leaders are rarely the most liked. They are the ones willing to make hard calls, to alienate factions, to prioritize outcomes over approval ratings. This is not an endorsement of tyranny. It is an observation about the structure of power itself. Power requires the ability to act despite disapproval, and the more you need to be liked, the less you can afford to act. You become paralyzed by the potential for rejection. Every decision is a referendum on your likability, and that is exhausting. It is also ineffective. The most liked person is tired. They are emotionally drained from managing everyone's feelings, from being the thermometer and thermostat of every social situation. The powerful person conserves that energy, and they let the room find its own temperature. They focus on the outcome, not the atmosphere. Here is the mechanism in relationships too. The partner who is more afraid of losing the relationship has less power in it. If you are the one always initiating, always apologizing first, always trying to keep things smooth, you have revealed your hand. You need this more. And need is the opposite of power. The person who can walk away, who has options, who is not desperate for reconciliation, that person sets the terms. This does not mean relationships should be power struggles. Healthy ones are not. But even in healthy relationships, there is an implicit understanding of who needs whom more. And that understanding shapes everything from conflict resolution to daily decisions. The most liked person, because they have practiced needing approval everywhere, often brings that same dynamic into intimate relationships. They become the accommodator, the fixer, the one who bends. So what is the final insight here? The most liked person holds the least power because power and likability require opposite psychological orientations. Likability requires openness, flexibility, and a focus on others' comfort. Power requires boundaries, consistency, and a focus on objectives. You can have both, but only if you prioritize power first and allow likability to emerge as a byproduct, not a goal. If you are the most liked person in your world, you are probably kind, empathetic, and skilled at reading social cues. These are strengths, but they become weaknesses when they prevent you from advocating for yourself, from taking up space, from making moves that might upset the balance. The world will not hand you power because you are nice. It will hand you power when you demonstrate that you do not need its permission. This is the dark truth. The hierarchy is not designed to reward kindness. It is designed to reward leverage. And the most liked person has given away their leverage in exchange for smiles. If that trade serves you, keep it. But if you are reading this and feeling a quiet resentment, a sense that you have been undervalued despite all you give, then you already know. Likability has cost you more than it has paid. You cannot be everyone's comfort and your own champion. You cannot hold the group together and also break ahead of it. At some point, you must choose. And if you choose power, you must be willing to be misunderstood, resented, and occasionally alone. That is the price. But the alternative is being surrounded by people who love you and a life that does not belong to you. If this video unsettled something in you, if it made you question the roles you have been playing, then you are already starting to see the architecture. And once you see it, every interaction becomes a choice about where you stand in the structure you have been living in all along.